Our second story is an update on a case that we covered on the TV show Crime Watch Daily. Bethany Decker was a young 21-year-old military wife. She was a mom. She had a toddler, a son. And then she suddenly went missing in 2011 while her husband was deployed in Afghanistan. The couple had been struggling in their marriage. That was obvious, according to everyone in the family. Bethany was 5 months pregnant at the time of her disappearance. She also worked as a waitress because she was a full-time college student, so she was doing both. She was an honors student at the university. Family says very intelligent woman, worked super hard. All right. Bethany's disappearance was not reported for 3 weeks because what ended up happening was there were a bunch of Facebook postings and messages that appeared to seem to be coming from Bethany, but the English and the phrasing, none of it was right. And people started realizing, hold on a second, you're not Bethany. Where is Bethany? Hey, has anybody seen or heard from Bethany? So that's when all these folks started to call Bethany's mom. Mom said, you know what? Bethany's so busy. It is not unusual for me not to directly talk to her every day. But these messages were coming in, so it appeared Bethany was alive. All right. So then on February 19th, 2011, Bethany's mother received, a bunch of phone calls from people she didn't know saying something is wrong with Facebook. So then Bethany's mom asked her mom. So Bethany's grandparents were asked to go check on her apartment in Ashburn, Virginia. Bethany's grandparents say that they found the car all dusty, parked kind of crooked with a flat tire. Never a good sign of what's to come. Apparently, it had been like that for some time. No one answered the door. At this point, the family panics. The mother calls the cops and says, something's happened to my daughter. We think she's missing. They go into the apartment and they're also tracking cell phones, checking to see if there's any activity on her credit cards. No activity on cell phone, no activity on credit cards. It's as if she has just completely disappeared. And as you and I know, people just don't disappear. A few people maybe want to disappear on purpose, but that is not the majority of these cases. Now, what I find interesting about this, David, as we go through this case is what is really missing from this case is the forensics, the DNA. That this is what is completely absent here, and you might be able to give us some insight into where it might actually be that we're not looking. I just want to talk about the case a little bit more. So they interview Bethany's husband, Emil, and he had seen her recently, but he was ultimately checked off the list as not a suspect. However, Bethany was having an affair. She had a boyfriend that she was living with. Remember, the marriage wasn't doing well. It's all this drama in someone's life that actually helps to piece a crime, kind of as DNA, if you will. It's like emotional DNA, I'm going to call it, that can help piece what's going on in a person's life. So they quickly zeroed in on someone called Ronald Roldan. So Bethany met Ronald while working at a restaurant. They began having an affair. And according to a local newspaper, it may have been his baby. We don't know for sure whose baby it was, but she was pregnant. So this guy was never charged. Like, no one really was charged. This case has been cold for years. And what's interesting is that now there has been an arrest, but the authorities are being very tight-lipped about why there's been arrest all of a sudden. And we don't believe at least, that forensics has played a role in this. So what do you do with a case like this where you have someone who's disappeared? They've never found her. They've never found her body. And the boyfriend, Roland, who's been arrested, he's not been charged with murder. This is not, it's not elevated to that yet. So where would they have, I guess I should ask it this way. When you're dealing with what appears to be a missing person and you're dealing with an adult, right? And people can take off. I always say it's in those first 24 to 48 hours where so much of the evidence is lost because cops always treat things as, maybe she just took off. Maybe she was done. So they don't capture the forensics in time. Do you find that is an issue, let's say, for your more current cases?
Well, our caseload is obviously biased towards either the remains of somebody or crime scene because we test DNA. But we have been involved and consulted on cases where, and it's a tricky kind of case where there's a suspected crime, but there's no body. So what do? You want to either to identify someone or to link someone to someone else using DNA with no body is a challenge. But ultimately, that body had to be taken somewhere, and maybe that body was that person was driven somewhere or somehow otherwise transported. That person would have come into contact with materials, and so sometimes in other cases, I don't know about this case, there are other items that can be examined for evidence or some trace kind of DNA that might suggest that the object or the item had come in contact with that person that's missing. And while it doesn't definitively prove that the person was murdered or not murdered, at least it can collect more evidence to tie the person who owns those items to the disappearance of that person. And sometimes it's enough to get folks talking, and sometimes it's enough to identify new people of interest that might know something, but have for whatever reason not come forward earlier.
It's an interesting case in the sense that Bethany's family has made it absolutely clear that Ronald was abusive, very possessive and controlling, and that they were actually helping her to make a plan to get away from him. And we find often in these cases of domestic violence where there is a very violent and controlling individual in the relationship, that it is at the cusp of trying to get away or ending a relationship when so many of, let's say if she was murdered, where the murders or vicious attacks occur. It's like an inciting incident in a relationship like that. It's the most dangerous time actually during a domestic violence situation is the moment the person who is suffering tries to get away, because then the other one just goes berserk. So even though police knew all of this, they did their forensics in a slightly different way, if you will. They did look into those Facebook postings. And when they traced back the IP address to all the postings that didn't make any sense under her name, well, they all went back to Roland's computer. But that still was not enough to arrest him. So he was always clearly a person of interest, but had never been named. All right. Now, 10 years later, he's finally been charged. And what's interesting is he's been charged again with abduction. He has not been charged with her murder. Here's something that I think may be playing a role in all of this. So that's one thing, right? There's Bethany's case. Separate of that, Ronald had recently been released from a North Carolina prison. He was charged with attempted murder for a 2014 domestic violence attack on his then girlfriend, Vicki Willoughby, in their North Carolina home. Ronald was arrested after brutally beating her, and he shot her 3 times and took out her eye. This is incredibly violent. On May 2016, he pleaded guilty to 2 reduced charges in North Carolina: felony assault with a deadly weapon and intent to kill by inflicting serious injury, and felony assault inflicting serious bodily injury. Crime Watch Daily talked to Vicki as part of Bethany's case to further understand what was going on. She describes her attack and she describes what happened that night. Here's a clip.
He used to have what I called outbursts out of nowhere, rages of anger. And they would literally come out of nowhere.
One too many outbursts and then physical abuse had convinced Vicki to leave. But one November night, her plan to move on for good almost got her killed.
What happened on that Tuesday?
He came towards me in the living room, never said a word. He took my laptop and my phone out from in front of me, laid those aside. He grabbed me at the top of my hair and just started plummeting me with his right fist. Immediately snapped my neck, because that's the first thing I felt go. I felt it and I heard it.
With a broken neck, Vicki crawled to a nearby chair where she had hidden a gun.
I had such a fear Ronald was going to kill me. So that night, for some reason, I had 2 guns. One was under the dog bed and one was in the chair in front of me.
She managed to reach it. But after shooting Roldan twice, he was able to grab the gun from her and fire his own rounds. One grazed her arm, the other a direct hit to her head where the bullet stayed lodged.
After he shot me, I laid down for a moment. I stayed where I was because I thought I was going to die.
According to TV station WTOP, Ronald Roldan was extradited to Virginia on November 10th following the completion of his North Carolina case. So basically, after he's done serving time for assaulting Vicky and taking her eye out, he gets arrested immediately on this case, on Bethany's case. Now, one of the issues I do believe could be immigration. I think there's the possibility that once he exited the prison, that he may have been deported. So this is speculation on my part, but I got a feeling that authorities said, if we're ever going to get him, we got to get him right now. So the question is, will he cooperate and give us more information? Will someone else step forward? Or will he only be charged with kidnapping and not on the murder charge? Because he's not been charged with her murder. I mean, a case like this, this one feels very, very cold, even though it's not nearly as old as Carla's case.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you're just not lucky enough to have. Again, cases with no bodies, they're challenging, and you're not lucky enough to have the evidence that you need. I hope they have evidence, something. I guess they must have something that I guess ties them maybe through this electronic records and everything else to her disappearance. But I think it's very hard to make a case for murder without a body. And if they're lucky, hopefully, and it was a murder, hopefully they find some forensic items, whether, in his car or somewhere else. If he wasn't careful at Facebook posting, hopefully he was similarly not careful about how he, disposed of the body if there was a murder, and they can comb through those items and find something. Because if there's DNA, if you find DNA in the trunk of a car, if there's blood in the trunk of a car and it belongs to a person that's missing, it's not proof, but it's definitely suggestive that something, people don't ordinarily ride in the backs of cars in the trunk.
No.
So
Right.
it certainly build a case that something terrible had happened.
Well, I think also, take into account here that this is a woman with a young child. So she just fell off the face of the earth. No, there's no way.
Yeah,
right?
It seems very suspicious at the least.
So we'll keep tabs on this one for everyone to figure out what more comes from this case that might actually put all the pieces together for us.